We're going to read Dante. How many people have read this book before? All right, people who've read with me before have read it, and a few others. So we're going to read the entire thing. Many times people will just read Inferno, you know, the first part, and then they'll stop. And so we're going to talk in a minute why that isn't such a great idea and why that's going to give you the wrong impression of the poem. But we might want to start with the question, why should we bother reading a 700-year-old Italian language poem? I mean, they're talking about the Middle Ages, right? Way back, those people didn't know anything back then, right? Why would we bother? Why are you here? Why do you want to read this?
Classic.
It's classic. Right? Well, some of you are here because you read it before. What made you show up the first time? Well, I guess we all have our own reasons to be here, right? We're interested. Maybe we always wanted to read it. We never had a chance. Maybe we heard the class was good last time, and so we decided to take it. Maybe we took it last time, and the class was so bad we didn't learn anything, so we're back for round 2. No. Well, the reason why I love the poem so much, this will be the 7th time I've read it. And then I've read various bits and pieces of it separately. But this is the 7th time I've read it. I've read it in several translations. I've read the Italian. So why do I keep coming back to it so many times? Well, the very first time I read it was back in college. It was in summer in between, I think, my sophomore and junior years. And I had nothing to do. I like to read extra stuff during the summers. And so I grabbed from my local Borders, back when Borders were still around, right? I grabbed my local copy of it. It was a translation by A.S. Klein, not a bad translation, an old translation, but not a bad one, with no notes. No notes, no introduction, nothing. And I read it by myself. Needless to say, I was completely lost. Put it back on the shelf, figured, okay, that's that. I'm not, it's a classic, I really don't quite get it. Of course, back then, not a Christian even, so really don't get it, no familiarity with the Bible. Really have no idea what's going on with this. Fast forward a few years, I'm married, and I go on my honeymoon to Florence. Right? My family comes from a little town just outside of Florence, and actually we'll hear a little bit about that town, Pistoia, in the comedy as we move along. And you can't get away from Dante in Florence. For those people who've been there, there's more than 30 plaques all around the city with little different pieces of the comedy on it, and we have no room for seating in here. Why don't we bring some chairs in from another room? If it's going to stay this big the whole time, we will find a new location. So we can probably go over to the pack. But anyways, so there's all these plaques all over the city, and I just fell in love with Florence. It's my favorite city in the world, and I just wanted to learn everything about Florentine history. And the more you read Florentine history, Dante crops up again and again and again. So that made me go back to the poem, and I've kept reading it again and again, and I get more and more out of it every time. The second time that I read it, I read the translation that I've recommended for the class. For those of you who don't have a copy yet, it's the Mark Musa translation. This here is the Inferno. This one here is Inferno. It looks like this, with this guy on the cover. And then there's a 1-volume.
This is like this one. Tell me, there's 3 of this.
There's 3 of that one, right. You got to buy 3 parts of that one.
Yeah, this is just Inferno.
That's just Inferno.
Purgatory second, and
then Paradiso is separate too. That one has the same translation, but all 3 in one. Plus it has, I think it has Vita Nuova in the back, a different book by Dante. It's very interesting to read in light of the comedy. He actually wrote that one first.
Too. Kindle has it too.
Okay, yeah, it's on Kindle, even better. So you can get a version on Kindle. That version doesn't have as much notes as this version, but we're going to talk about it a lot in class, so I'll be able to supply a lot of that. So if you're looking for an easy portable one, I recommend that portable Dante. Otherwise, this one. I'm going to be using a different translation in class. I'm going to be using one by Hollander, Robert Hollander. This way you'll get to hear a different translation. They say in Italian that a translator is a traitor, especially of poetry. They say reading poetry and translations like eating candy with the wrapper still on, right? So I want you to at least hear a couple of translations, and every once in a while I'll torture you by giving you some of Dante's original Italian, just so you can get it in your ear, because it is beautiful. Even apart from what we can gather in English, just the Italian, just the poetry of it, the music of the language is very beautiful. So, anyways, eventually I did read Dante, and that would, over the years, eventually lead me into the Catholic Church. So here I am today talking about Dante in the Catholic Church. And this is why Dante wrote it. In his letter to one of his patrons, he says that the aim of the whole and of the part is to remove those living in this life from a state of misery, this is a state of sin, and to bring them to a state of happiness. Right? and even eternal happiness, eternal beatitude by seeing the face of God. And that's exactly what we're going to do throughout this class. We're going to start in sin. We're going to start lost in a dark forest, perhaps suicidal. We completely have lost the straight way, the way of life that leads to God. But by the end, we're going to go through some dark periods. But by the end, we're going to see the face of God himself. And that's, of course, what we all want in our lives.
Got it.
Again, these are going around for people who don't know. This is, if you write your email, I will email you what we're going to read when. That way, if you miss a class, you can keep reading, and then you won't miss out on too much. So, what are we getting ourselves into? We're going to be reading 14,233 11-syllable verses. All right? That is what we've got ourselves into. That's pretty much any translation you get. They do tend to keep those, unless you get the prose translation, which I do not recommend. Dante invented his system of poetry for this poem. It's called terzo rima, third rhyme. So you got the first line, then you have a second line with a different rhyme word. Third line rhymes with the first line, and that's the first tercet. Right? Then you have a space. Then you have the next tercet starts up, but it picks up this same rhyme, and then a different one, and then that same one again, and then it goes on and on all through the poem. So the whole poem is interlinked with these rhymes. Now it's hard to do that in English. It's much easier to do it in Italian, but there is one translation by Dorothy Sayers, and she actually replicates this same rhyme all the way through the poem. It's not as literal of a translation as you might imagine. So it's not exactly what Dante is saying, but you get a sense of the poetry. So that's not something bad to take a look at if you happen to find yourself a copy. So we have terzo rima, we have 100 cantos, right? So we're going to be reading, there's 33 cantos. This is another thing Dante invents. He invents the canto, right? And he divides this into 3 canticles. Guess what? He invents this too. So we've got 33 in Inferno, 33 in Purgatorio, 33 in Paradiso. But that doesn't add up to 100, does it? So Dante's going to add an introductory canto to this to get to his perfect 100. All right, so Dante is a little obsessed with numbers. He really likes these numbers, right? So we see all these 3s, right? So what's that? What do you think that's going to represent to us?
Trinity.
The Trinity, right? And this terzo rima is going to have the Trinity laced throughout the foundation of the entire poem. So even when we're not seeing God, his presence is always made felt through this rhyme system. Of course, we've got all these 3s here. In the other book he wrote, the Vita Nuova, there he doesn't do anything with 3, but his big number there is 9. His lady love. He was a romantic poet before he wrote his comedy. His lady love Beatrice, who we will meet again in this book too, he says she's a perfect 9. And why 9? Because 3 times itself is 9. So again, the Trinity. He's always going back to this Trinitarian conception. So I'm going to give you a little sense of this terzo rima in the original Italian, okay? So you can just listen to the end rhyme words and you'll hear how this works. And it's the beauty of the poem just flows through the entire 14,233 11-syllable verses. Nel mezzo di cammin nella nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la dritta via era smarrita. Ai quanto a dir qual era cosa dura esta selva selvaggia e aspra e forte che nel pensiero rinnova la paura. Tante amara che poco è più morte, ma per trattar del ben che vi trovai, dirò delle altre cose che io vos scorte. And I won't read the whole poem to you in Italian, but you get an idea maybe of the sense of the Italian. And every once in a while we'll dip in to the original Italian. If you really love Dante, you could be crazy like me and go out and learn Italian just to be able to understand the poem better. All right, so Dante, he's writing this. Again, we start in hell. We're going to end with God. Now, how many of us know the great St. Thomas Aquinas? Right? We know him probably, right? Yeah. Okay, so he was the greatest medieval theologian. In the Middle Ages, they liked to write these summas. And St. Thomas writes the Summa Theologiae, also sometimes called the Summa Theologica. Right? This is a massive work. It's like 3,000 pages. It's really, really, really long. It's really good, but it's really long. And these summas always start with God. Because they figure if you can't prove the rest of the faith, if God doesn't exist. If there's no God, how can you show Catholicism is true or Jesus was God or anything, right? So they always start with God and they move away from God. Dante, he does a reverse summa. He starts with a man lost by himself alone in a wood, and he will end with God. Right? And he'll draw deeply on St. Thomas, who just lived a century or so before Dante. But he loved St. Thomas, and he would draw deeply on him. So we're reading, what's the title of our poem, right? The Divine Comedy, right? So why is it called the Divine Comedy? Well, Dante didn't call it that, for one. He just called it La Commedia, the comedy. That's all he called it. His first great commentator, he's a great writer in his own right, Giovanni Boccaccio, maybe we've heard of his Decameron, right? He's the one who first called it Divina, divine. And it would be published as the Divine Comedy for the first time in Venice in 1555. Dante's living, his poem is set in the year 1300. He lives till 1321. So a couple hundred years later, it will officially become the Divine Comedy. So, why comedy? Is it funny, do you think? The people who write it with me, is it funny? Maybe there's a moment or two. A moment or two down maybe that we think is a little funny. But no, it's not really funny. But of course, comedy is something that ends in sorrow. Begins in sorrow and ends happily, right? And tragedy is the opposite. A great tragedy would start out happy enough, but it's going to end in sorrow. And this is why Dante, he would like to say to people, he'd say he would say a tragic beginning and a comic ending to you. Easier for him to say than me, but that's what he would wish people. A tragic beginning and a comic ending to you. And I think I may have sent an email out with that on it to someone. And I said I would explain. It sounds nasty. My wife says that sounds nasty when I say that to people. But it doesn't. It means that a tragic beginning is happy. A comic ending is happy. So he's wishing you an entirely happy life. It's like a lot of books that we're familiar with in many ways. It's a book about a travel into a place that even though it be real, it's unreachable. So you could think about a book about traveling to the moon that was written before we could get there. Or Jules Verne writing about being under the sea before we had submarines. Or even a book now written about going into the past. Say I wrote a book about how I went back and met Dante. Well, the past is real, but I could never actually get there. So that's the same thing here for Dante. It's an unreachable place. Of course, Dante firmly believes it's all real. So it's similar to those kind of books we might read. It's a poetic expression of the worldview of Dante's day. It sums up everything those people believed in many ways. And as Catholics, everything we believe too, because the Catholic faith doesn't change over time. It's autobiographical. It's like a historical fiction with all the characters that we're going to meet, and it's doused with a heavy dose of medieval scholastic philosophy. But done in such a way that it's not difficult. At least do we think it's difficult? No, we don't think it's difficult. The people that have read it before with me, right? So it was written between 1304 and 1321. Does anyone remember when I said when it was set? 1300. So Dante sets the poem in 1300, but he's writing it 1304 till he dies in 1321. So this gives him the ability to have the people in the poem predict the future with uncanny accuracy, right? Because Dante's already lived through it all. So he's, wait till this happens. And of course, it already has happened. So Dante's able to give these people the ability to tell him what's going to happen in his life and in world events because he's already lived through it. Right from the beginning, say maybe about 1314 or so, parts of it start circulating through Italy. And it becomes an instantaneous smash hit. Everyone's loving this book. They're reading it as it's coming out, and everyone's kind of just waiting for the next part to come out, almost like a serial. Think about it almost like a TV show. You're waiting for that next episode to come out of whatever, Seinfeld or whatever is popular today on TV. So it's an immediate hit. It continues in popularity. It's a bestseller for the first 250 years. And then you get the scientific age, the age of enlightenment, and interest in Dante falls off, even in Italy. Because everyone's now, they're so enlightened, they don't want to hear about hell and purgatory and all this Catholic stuff, or superstition. And then, towards the end of the 1700s, into the Romantic period, it just takes off in popularity again. And it's remained popular all the way through today. Even today, we have a Dan Brown bestseller called Inferno, right? Anyone read that? Okay, so we have that. There's even a video game out, I hear, about Dante fighting his way through hell. Doing violence to the text, of course, but at least people are doing something with Dante. And I hear there might be a movie.
Really?
Wow.
In Italy, Roberto Benigni. Anyone know Roberto Benigni, right? He went to the Oscars, jumped up, started kissing everybody. He actually will go around Italy and recite the entire poem. And people to sold out see it. Of course, he's a great actor. I'm sure he does a great job. I haven't been able to see it, even on tape. I'd love to. So it's set in year 1300. Why 1300? Well, this is the year of mercy, right? Pope Francis has declared this the year of mercy. The first one of these special years declared by Pope, 1300. Pope Boniface VIII declares this the Jubilee year. You come to Rome, you go through some churches, and your sins are forgiven. Okay? So this is the first Jubilee year. Declared by Pope Boniface VIII. We will hear a lot more from Pope Boniface VIII, Dante's arch enemy. He does not care for Pope Boniface VIII. You can guess where we're going to meet him. I bet most of you can guess where we're going to meet him now. Not a good person to get on the by side of, this great poet. More specifically, we're going to start on Good Friday. And the poem, Dante's journey takes about a week. So we are going to have that Holy Week is going to be the week of the journey, where we're traveling throughout the other worlds. And as we meet these people, we're going to realize that there's multiple levels. Dante tells us his work is polysemous. It's many meanings inside his work. So it's an allegory. We're dealing with an allegory, right? So there's a couple of different types of allegory. The one is like if you've read Romain de la Rose, that's the famous one from the Middle Ages, the one Dante would have read. It uses personifications. So you meet rage, right? You meet desire. You meet courage. If you're traveling through hell, maybe you meet sloth or somebody. And then, so that's the kind of things that you would expect to meet. We're not going to get that from Dante. He throws that out. We're not going to meet abstractions. We're going to meet much more interesting people. We're going to meet real, mostly real people. He also will bring in fictional people. He doesn't care if it's a fictional person that everyone's going to know. If it's a real person, everyone's going to know. He's going to use them. He's going to meet these real people. So, for example, when we're traveling through the upper part of hell, he's going to meet his buddy, a guy he knew in Florence, Ciacco, right? Florentine idiom for hog. And he's in with the gluttons. And so he doesn't have to have a conversation with Ciacco about gluttony. He just shows us how he's being punished. He tells us why he's there. And he can leave gluttony to the side. Instead, he can spend the time talking about one of Dante's favorite subjects. Anyone remember? Florentine politics. He loves Florentine politics. He will have an entire conversation about how rotten Florence is getting in the future here. So he's able to have these much more interesting discussions. And these are real people, so we can care about them a lot more than we could ever have cared about gluttony. It's hard to get too interested in gluttony, but it's very interesting to talk to some of these people. And some of them we'll know. Some of them are still famous to today. Many of them are only famous because Dante wrote about them. All right, and he steals what's called the allegory of the theologians to pull this off. And it was very groundbreaking at the time to do that. Because he says, you need to read my poem the way we read the Bible. And that's kind of shocking, but it works really well. Okay, so maybe we'll give some analogies today. We got old Ciacco. Nobody remembers him, I'm sure, unless you read the class. And I hope you do remember him then. So maybe instead of going down into hell and you got under the circle of the lustful and meeting lust, I'm not actually putting anybody in hell by doing this, but maybe we run into Hugh Hefner, right? Right? They have a conversation with Hugh Hefner and say we can talk about the Supreme Court or something if we want to. We don't have to talk about lust, but we all know why he's there, and we all know how his punishment is fitting. Instead of meeting greed, we could run into Andrew Carnegie, maybe. Or the way Dante would probably phrase it, he who owned the Pittsburgh steel mills, right? Because he likes to be very coy about how he's going to name these people. Instead of meeting Trader, we could meet Benedict Arnold, someone from American history that we would all know. And he would, like I said, he'll bring in fictional people. Maybe we run into George Costanza somewhere, Jay Gatsby. It doesn't matter to Dante, as long as he thinks you can know these people. Now, if I had a book, and if Dante had written this book, say with all those people, we'd all be able to identify them instantaneously, right? But 700 years from now, in China, reading a Chinese translation, maybe it's Mandarin Chinese, right? How many people do you think they know this? They know George Costanza? Would they know Hugh Hefner? Probably not. Right? So that's why we're going to read together, so I can tell you who these people were, and that's why the books with the notes help, because they'll tell you who was this guy, and why is he here. Right? So a lot of the people we meet will be from Florence, although we'll meet people throughout Italy and even other places. This is Dante's city. He's born in Florence. He loves Florence. He doesn't live in Florence when he's writing it, and we'll get to why in a minute. He's not too happy about that either. But Florence at this time, right now we think about Florence and maybe we think of the Renaissance. Maybe we think of Michelangelo. Maybe we think of Leonardo. Maybe we think of the Uffizi Gallery. Well, none of that's there yet. That's all later. The Medici family, all that's later. Florence at this time, though, is the economic powerhouse of Europe, and really of the world. It's one of the biggest cities in the world, 100,000 people. Doesn't sound a lot to us now, but back then it's a massive city. 100,000 people. Major cultural center. You've got artists like Giotto. He's a great painter who's transforming the way painting is done. And we've got great architects. We've got all this great stuff happening. We have poets like Dante changing the way poetry is written and read. And we have the gold florin. I was going to bring pictures and glass them up here, and one of them was going to be the gold florin. 1252 is first minted. It's a gold coin, the first gold coin minted in Europe since antiquity. And it becomes the standard for all international business transactions, is this coin minted in Florence, in this little medieval city. Well, maybe not so little for them. I mean, then it was the biggest city in the world. And Florentine bankers will move everywhere because they got the currency. There are so many different places that Pope Boniface VIII, our old friend, he once remarked that Florentines must be the fifth element in the world because they're everywhere. These Florentines are everywhere. Coins up to that point, mostly, they would be, who do you think would be on? Who's on our money? Famous people, rulers of our people, right? Kings and whatnot. Not for Florence. On the one side, they put St. John the Baptist, the patron saint of the city, so the religious symbol of the city. On the other side, they put the Florentine fleur-de-lis, the secular symbol of the city. So this is the city's making this money. It's not on the authority of an emperor. It's not on the authority of a king. It is the city of Florence guaranteeing the quality of this money. So we have, from one of the great chroniclers of the day, Giovanni Villani. He knew Dante. He was friends with Dante. He gives us some idea of what life in Florence was like. He says there was 8,000 to 10,000 boys and girls learning how to read. 1,000 to 1,200 studying math. Obviously, this is a harder, kind of like advancing through the college curriculum. And about 550 to 600 studying advanced Latin and philosophy. And by 1338, there will be 110 churches, Catholic churches, serving the city. So 100,000 people, all of them going to Mass. Not necessarily all believers, as we'll see, but everybody's involved in the life of the church. It's just woven throughout the city. So from between 1200 and 1300, we have just tons of construction in the city. The city's much wealthier than it had been. And we have I could list them off. I have them written down here, but just church after church. For those who have been to Florence, Santa Maria Novella by the train station is built in this period. Santa Reparata, which is the original cathedral, is transformed into the Duomo. The dome isn't on it yet because they don't know how to do that, but they start building the structure. They got Santo Spirito, it's got the Augustins in it. Santissima Annunziata, started by the Servites. And they have all these religious orders. Santa Croce, still the largest Franciscan church in the world, is constructed. They build the civic buildings that we know. The Bargello, where Donatello's David is. Palazzo Vecchio dominates the main city square. Kind of off to the side a bit, and we'll see why that is, too, as we read Dante. New bridges are going up over the Arno. In 1216, we only have one bridge, the Ponte Vecchio. By 1300, we've got 4 bridges spanning this river. The bridges we see today, by the way, are not the bridges from Dante's day. Only Ponte Vecchio is an original bridge. The rest, destroyed by the Nazis during World War II, as they were retreating from Florence. So another reason to hate the Nazis if you didn't hate them enough. The destruction of these beautiful bridges. They built new walls in 1284 to enclose more of the city, right? Some of these churches are outside of the walls. People are living outside of the walls. There's banks being set up outside of the walls. It's just not safe. So they decide they're going to build these larger walls, 5.5 miles in length, 47 feet high, 7 feet thick. They built these massive, massive walls. Those walls would last until the 19th century, when they too were destroyed, but not by Germans this time, but by an Italian architect. Giuseppe Poggi destroys the walls of Florence. And I know. 1860, Florence actually very, very temporarily becomes the capital of the newly united Italy. And they figured, we ought to start making this place bigger. Get rid of some of these old medieval walls. And they just demolish them. If anyone's been to Lucca in Italy, you can still see how beautiful some of these walls are. So why was our city growing so much? Well, we talked about it, right? the gold flooring, the commercial revolution that's going on. Remember, this is the Middle Ages. When you think of the Middle Ages, do you think of bankers and lots of money being made? Probably not. You're probably thinking knights on horseback, big castles, peasants tilling the fields. Well, not here in northern Italy, and not especially here in Florence. Population goes up 140% between 1200 and 1300. The largest population growth in Florentine history. And the people who are the natives, people like Dante, who claims to be an original, from a family that's an original Roman family that settled Florence, they don't like these newcomers. They blame all the problems on them. Right? We're in the midst of a presidential election now, and does our country necessarily like all of the immigrants coming in? Well, it's very contentious, right? And so it was in Florence. The only big difference then were the people were coming in from these little tiny villages outside of Florence. So it would be like people in Greenville hating all the people from Taylor's and Malden and Simpsonville moving into Greenville. Get out of Greenville, right? They saw them as very different. I don't know if we would see them as all that different. So the Florentine population just skyrockets. That's why they have those huge walls. Ironically, well, I guess unfortunately, most of those walls will have a lot of empty space in them for a very, very long time. Population will not hit 100,000 again in Florence until the 19th century. So Florentine population skyrockets and then drops. Any idea why it might drop?
Plague.
That's right. 1348, the plague hits Florence. 60% of the people were killed. That's absolutely brutal. They say here, at every church they dug deep pits, and thus those who were poor who died during the night were bundled up quickly and thrown into the pit. In the morning, when a large number of bodies were found in the pit, they took some earth, shoveled it on top, and then others were placed on top of them, and then another layer of earth, just as one makes lasagna with layers of pasta and cheese. That's right. Very person. Yeah, so what can you do? You're surrounded by that much death. I guess you get a little bit
Hardened.
Yeah, that's a good word for it, hardened. So Florence is super wealthy. It's its own city-state. That's important to know. Florence recognizes no political superior to its own city. Right? It's a city. It's also its own country. It had been ruled by the emperors for a long time until the 1100s, early 1100s, and then the early part of the 12th century, the local nobility kicks out the imperial rulers and they take control of the city themselves. The emperors in that period were very weak. These local noble families will rule Florence for a good 100 years, and then the popolo, the people, and they became libertas, right? Liberty, power of the people. They will take control of the city, and then they'll fight with these nobles. So medieval society was divided. You know how you have, like, people will say the 1%, right? Well, that was actually true back then. So you have on the top of the pyramid, you have those who fight and those who pray. And everybody else down here were peasants, those who work. Okay? So this movement of the popolo was those who work taking control of the government of the city for themselves. They were no longer going to allow those who pray and those who fight to run the city. And we'll see, and you probably remember, for those who took the class before, that those who fight sure like to fight. Not only the knights in northern Europe, but here in Florence, the streets of the city will be continuously bathed in blood as these warring families continue to constantly fight each other. One of the reasons why the people rise up. They're trying to make money here, run these banks, build these buildings. And these people up here who are ruling them are just trying to kill each other all the time. And they got these vendettas. They're constantly waging war against each other. In fact, they don't live in the countryside anymore with their castles. Many of them still own the castles there. But what they'll do is you got, your nice little Florentine house, and then next to it they build these monstrous towers. And then they fight each other. They put catapults up here. They dump boiling oil on people. They're firing arrows at people. We're a little short on seating, but you can probably bring a chair over maybe from next door. If we're going to stay this big for a couple weeks and everyone seems to be coming, I'll talk about getting a new location, or maybe even for next week. Anyways, so they're killing each other in the streets constantly. They build these towers. The government can't stop them. They're invincible in here. If anyone who's been to Italy, maybe you've been to San Gimignano. If you have, or if you ever go to Italy, it's a place to go because they still have all these towers. When the popolo, the people, take over, they demolish these towers. You can only see a couple of them cut way down by Ponte Vecchio. But they demolish these. So we have these warring factions. Now at the heart of it, you have these families. These families would count their strength and how many men they had, right? So if it was my family, the Baudentini family, maybe we'd have 100 men or something. And that's how many men you could have that would fight. And that's how strong your family was going to be. And they would have vendettas against each other. You killed someone in my family, now I'm going to kill someone in your family. You're going to kill someone in my family, etc., etc. So you have all these internecine feuds, starting right here at the beginning of the 1100s, whenever the nobles take control of the city. As time goes on, you kind of have almost a Cold War situation. You remember in the Cold War, you had the United States was a global power, and the USSR was a global power, right? And if your enemy was allied with the United States, you'd pick the Soviet Union, right? Like Cuba, right? Well, you're going to draw in the Soviet Union to balance that out. Same thing then, but the two major world superpowers were the emperor, the Holy Roman Empire, the emperor who claimed to have sovereignty over all people in the world, and the Pope, who also claimed to have sovereignty over all people, although of a spiritual kind. These are called the Guelphs. They are the ones who call in the help of the Pope, and the Ghibellines. We'll hear a lot about these people. And they call in the help of the emperor. So they take sides. A lot of this is really just local hatred. Florence is Guelph, and Siena down the street is going to be Ghibelline. Right? Lucca is Guelph, Pisa is going to be Ghibelline. Because they hate each other. They're just looking for someone to help them fight each other. There are also, there are ethnic differences. Different cities with different people will choose different sides. A lot of the Ghibellines actually come from a German stock that had invaded Italy back in the period whenever the Roman Empire fell. And we also have class differences. Those who worked down here typically became Guelphs. Obviously, the nobility would tend to favor the emperor, right? That's kind of in their wheelhouse. So you have the whole of Italy's being split up into these groups. Florence kind of stays out of it for a while. But in 1216, a very important date for our story, one Messer Buondelmonte di Buondelmonti. People back then like to have the same name. More than once. Dante is Dante Alighieri, his dad was Alighiero. So they tended to like to do that. Buondelmonte di Buondelmonte. He is supposed to marry a nice, pretty little girl from the Amadei family. Okay? And the date's set. They're betrothed. They're going to get married. But a woman from the Donati family, and this is an important family for us, she has an even prettier daughter. And she's even richer. So she says, hey, I'll tell you what, Buondelmonte, why don't you break off this engagement and come marry my much more beautiful and much wealthier daughter? Well, he says, all right, let's do it right now. Well, this Amadei family happens to be neighbors with and allies with the Uberti family, which is the most powerful. Someone groaned. Okay. The most powerful family in Florence is the Uberti family. They do not like what Mr. Buondelmonte decided to do. So they have a meeting, and they say, what are we going to do about this? And one of their families that they're allied with, one of the members steps forward, Mosca de Lamberti. We will meet him again. He says, only one thing you can do. Kill him. Right? That makes sense? Kill him. So, Buondelmonte, it's Easter Sunday, 1216. He's riding across Ponte Vecchio, dressed all in white, sitting on a white horse, minding his own business. He gets to the end of the bridge, right by where the statue of Mars had been, and the Uberti, and the Amadei, and the Lamberti, and all these families leap out, drag him off his horse, and kill him. Right there in the street. The whole city divides. Some become Guelphs, some become Ghibellines. The Uberti become the leaders of the Ghibelline faction, and everyone starts massive amounts of bloodshed. The Ghibellines will exile the Guelphs. They'll take their houses. They'll take all their property. They'll say, if you come back, we're going to have you executed. Then the emperor will suffer a defeat somewhere. The pope will get more powerful. The Guelphs will come back. They'll kick out the Ghibellines. They'll destroy the Ghibellines' houses. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. Then in 1260, another important date, the Ghibellines, who had been kicked out by the Guelphs, they traveled down to Siena, which was a Ghibelline city at the time. And they decide they are going to march an army and retake the city of Florence yet again and kick out the Guelphs again. Well, Florence marches a much more powerful army, 35,000 men to only 20,000. And they meet in battle outside of the city of Siena at Monteperti. This is another thing we're going to keep coming back to. We're going to keep hearing about this. The Ghibellines should lose. They're outnumbered. They're expected to lose. But right at a critical moment in the battle, they used to have carts. They'd have these carts, and they'd have the flag bearers. And that's how you knew what your general wanted you to do. And that's how you knew that your army was successful. And if you lost your cart, you knew all was lost. So standing right next to the flag bearer, Bocca dei Abbati, and we'll meet him again, turns around, chops off the flag bearer's hand. The flag falls. The Florentines go into panic. The Ghibellines crush them. Crushing defeat. To this day, when Florence plays Siena in soccer, you will hear the chant, Monteperti, Monteperti, rubbing in the faces of Florence that they lost this battle in 1260. Long memories, and they still have those same rivalries they had all the way back then. Now it's not bloodshed, though. Now they do it on the soccer pitch. So the Guelphs are destroyed. The Ghibellines take back the city. And they have a council, the Council of Empoli. And the Ghibelline leaders in the CNA they say, you know what? Enough is enough. The Guelphs are going to come back sooner or later. It's time to just wipe Florence off the map. Let's just burn it to the ground and be done with it. And one person, Farinata dei Umberti, says, fine, go ahead and try, and I will stand in front of the city with a sword in my hand, and I will defend it myself. So, even though he's a Ghibelline, very patriotic. And they say, okay, we'll leave Florence alone, Farinata. And the Ghibellines take back control of the city. It is in this Ghibelline-controlled city that Dante will be born. This is in 1260. Dante is born in 1265. Dante is born into Florence under Ghibelline rule. But he's born into a Guelph family. Obviously not that important of a family, or else they would have been exiled with the rest of the Guelphs. But he is part of the Alighieri family, or Guelphs. So Dante is born underneath the rule of people like Farinata. And we will meet Farinata later, as you're probably expecting at this point, right? The next year, though, in 1266, the Battle of Benvenuto, the emperor, the presumptive emperor, Manfred, we'll meet him also, is defeated at Benvenuto. And that's it. He's destroyed, his army is destroyed, the emperor's killed, it's over. That's it for the Ghibellines. They're basically done. And they won't come back again. The Guelphs take control of the city. They give a third of the Ghibelline property and money. They give that to the people who were Guelphs and were exiled. They bring them back. They say, here, this is to restore some of your property. A third of it goes into the city's treasury. And the last third goes into a newly created fund for the Parte Guelfa, for the Guelph Party, which now is going to operate almost as a government within a government. Think of like the Communist Party in Russia, right? In Soviet Russia, it had its own people in positions, and it wielded incredible power. That's what the Guelphs will end up doing. And so all's peaceful, right? The Guelphs have kicked out the Ghibellines. We finally have peace in Florence. Of course not. No, it can't be that easy. The Guelphs split into black Guelphs and white Guelphs and start battling each other, of course. It all started in Pistoia. As my family comes from there, so apologies to the Florentines from me. Whenever two cousins are playing together, having a snowball fight in the streets of Pistoia, the one accidentally hurts his other cousin, right? And that cousin goes back to his dad, and he's crying, he's upset. And the one who hurt the other kid, he goes back to his dad. And his dad says, hey, you better go and apologize. It's your cousin, you hurt him, go apologize. Cousin comes over, knocks on the door. Hey, I want to apologize. The dad steps out with sword in his hand, says, wounds are not healed by words, and slices the kid's hand off. Whole city breaks out into furor, and they divide into blacks and whites. The blacks will side closer with the papacy. The whites will become more moderates, and they'll flirt with some of the remaining Ghibellines. This feud, Florence is right near Pistoia, so they say, okay, we got to put an end to this. Let's bring the leaders. They're both in the same family, right? Because they're cousins, the Cancellieri family. Let's bring them to Florence, and we'll end this. Well, when they come to Florence, they start making allies in the city, and then they start battling each other in Florence, and Florence is divided. Blacks are led by Corso Donati. The whites by Vieri dei Cerchi. Corso was from an ancient, you remember the Donati family from here. They're an ancient noble family. They don't have so much money anymore. They're down on their luck a bit, but they're an ancient noble family. The Cerchi family, well, they're up-and-comer bankers, and they buy a castle, a big house right next door that used to belong to the Conti Guidi, another noble family, but now they own it. And they start renovating it. It's going to be bigger and better than ever. And it's going to be way bigger and better than Donati's house. Oh, he doesn't care much for that. And so they hate each other. And so they pick the black and white sides, and they start fighting each other. Dante's family, who incidentally lives sharing a wall with the Donati family. Their house borders the Donati family's house. They are white Guelphs, though. They will side against the Donati. Dante will even marry a Donati. He'll marry Gemma Donati. We will not meet her. She will not appear in anything Dante ever writes. Another woman will, but not poor Gemma. His professional life and his home life are entirely segregated. So the blacks and the whites start fighting each other. Violence in the city. The Pope keeps sending in different cardinals to try to make things peace. He's saying, everybody give each other the kiss of peace. Everyone's going to be nice now. Because remember, they're all Guelphs, so they're all supposedly friends with the Pope. They all do. The guy starts to leave. They break out in violence again. They excommunicate the city. It's over and over and over again. Finally, Corso Donati, being from a noble family, those who fight, eventually will defeat the whites. How do they do it? They stayed closer with the papacy, and they asked the Pope to send in someone from the royal house of France. Much bigger than Florence. Little tiny Florence, right? So the king's brother, the king of France's brother, will march down into Florence as a pacifier of the city, but really as an ally to the blacks, and he would drive the whites into exile, including Dante Alighieri. And he will be condemned for accepting bribes, which he said he never did, and it seems as if the historical record verifies that, but he will be condemned for supposedly accepting bribes, and they say, you come back to the city, we're going to burn you alive. Obviously, he doesn't come back. He wants to come back, but he doesn't. Dante had attained, in the year 1300, he will attain the highest position, like the President of the United States. They had a council of 6 people. That was their highest group, and Dante will actually be on that council. And he will exile both the leaders of the blacks and the whites in one of these attempts to patch things up. And actually, one of the people he exiles, Guido Cavalcanti, will meet his dad. Is his best friend. That's Dante's best friend. And when he exiles him, he's exiled to this horrible malarial swamp where he contracts malaria, comes back to Florence, and then dies. So Dante's best friend dies because of Dante's own actions. The blacks take over the city. Inevitably enough, they split into 2 different factions, and they battle each other. And on, until finally the Medici family, if we're familiar with Florentine history, they become so powerful they just take over the whole city, and then that's that. Until that family dies out, and then it goes back to the Austrians, back to the emperor, all the way back to 1100 again. It's all for naught. So this is the Florence that Dante inhabits. This is the world in which our poem takes place. It's only a snapshot. We could probably talk for 14 weeks just about the history behind it, but I don't want to test your patience. 28-week class is too much. So these are the most important things, and we'll meet so many of these people. We'll meet so many of the founding fathers of Guelph Florence, like Tegaio Aldobrandini and Jacopo Restitucci and Guido Guerra, the great Guelph captain. And sometimes we won't meet them where we necessarily think a good Guelph boy like Dante would put them. But we will meet these people. Be like meeting, and for him, now to us, those are just some weird Italian names that we probably can't even remember now after I just said them 2 seconds ago. But the Dante, that's your George Washington, your Ben Franklin, and your Thomas Jefferson. Those are people in high esteem. So this is a very interesting period of history, very contentious, and this will produce Dante. So like we said, he was born in 1265. He says in his poem, which he sets in 1300, that remember I read it to you in Italian, right? Nel mezzo di cammino di nostra vita. In the middle of the journey of our life. Right? In the middle of the journey of our life. So he is, in 1300, 1265, he's 35 years old. And back then, according to the Bible, they thought everyone was going to live on average, obviously they recognize people died in childhood and whatnot, but that man would be apportioned about 70 years. So Dante's expecting to live about 70 years. So this is the middle of the journey of life. He is 35 years old, which I actually am now, whenever he takes his journey. Poor Dante will not live to see 70. He'll die in 1321 at 56. Himself a victim of malaria, just like his friend. So, who was he? Well, one of the first things about him is he was a great poet. He actually lived this really fascinating life, if you think about it. He falls in love at first sight. This magnificent love. He sees this girl, she's 9 years old. Falls madly in love with her, love for the rest of his life. This love produces some of the greatest poetry ever produced, including the Divine Comedy. The greatest poem ever produced. He's a leading player in the politics of his day, in the most important city in Europe. He suffers horrible political defeat. He's in exile and he wanders throughout Italy, maybe attending university at Paris, maybe even heading to Oxford, although that's unlikely, but people at Oxford say he did. And he is the author of the greatest book in human history. And yes, I say that even here in a room adorned with William Shakespeare. We have the greatest poet here in Dante, Shakespeare #2. Interestingly enough, when we go through Inferno, we'll meet some of the greatest poets in history. They're all from the antique world, of course. And we meet 5 of them. 5 of them. Homer and Virgil. Well, Virgil's staying there. We'll see a lot of Virgil. He sees all these great poets. And Dante says, and then I made a 1/6 of their number. But Dante certainly thought he was the greatest poet. Back when he was writing it, I think people would have laughed at him. But nowadays, I think for most people, I'm biased, but for most people, I think they would maybe say you got Dante, Shakespeare, and Homer, and that's about it. So he's one of the greatest poets ever. So it's a fascinating life that he lives. Interesting enough, with those 3 people, Shakespeare, Homer, and Dante. Now, there's all kinds of debates over who actually was Shakespeare. Who wrote these poems? Was it more than one person? Who wrote all these plays? Was it Shakespeare? Was it somebody else? Was it this? Was it that? Homer, no one even knows if he was a real person. Was it just a collection of stories that were put together and they labeled it with Homer? But Dante, we know exactly who he was. We know when he was born. We know where he was born. You can go see a museum, the house of Dante Alighieri. It's a reconstruction of his house, but it's on the same spot. We know a lot about Dante. So we know exactly who he is. It makes him much more interesting. Leonardo Bruni, an early historian of Dante, gave us a physical description. And I would have a picture up there if I had the technology to do so. But I'm sure you see him on the cover of your book. He was a man of great refinement, of medium height, and of a pleasant but deeply serious face. He spoke only seldom, and then slowly, but was very subtle in his replies. He delighted in music and singing, and we'll see him get in trouble for that when he first gets to purgatory. And he drew exceedingly well. Dante claims, of course, to be from this ancient Roman family. He's from Roman stock, and we'll meet that claim in the book. He's certainly from one of the oldest Florentine families. We'll meet one of his ancestors, his great-great-great-grandfather, Cacciaguida, when we get to heaven. He was a crusader who fought in the Second Crusade, died in the Second Crusade, and was knighted by the Emperor Conrad III. So this is a good family. He's from a noble family. They're kind of down on their luck when he's born, but he's, they're one of the poorer families. They aren't exiled. But nonetheless, he's from a good, noble family. Dante's mother, Bella Alighieri, will die when he is somewhere between 5 and 8. We don't know the exact date when she died. So his mother dies very early. His dad, Alighiero, will die when he's 18. That will make Dante the head of the household. This is why Dante is going to get involved in politics. That's what you do in Florence. You get involved in banking, or you get involved in some trade. He's a poet. He'll join the Guild of the Apothecaries. That's where the poets went. He'll start making money, and he will have to lead up this house. The same year his dad dies, when he's 18, it's the same year that his lady love, Beatrice, will say hi to him for the first time. And in the Vita Nuova, it's an incredibly big deal to him. So he sees her for the first time at a party at 9. Doesn't see her again for 9 years. At least according to Vita Nuova. But he is obsessed with this number 9, so he tries to work this in everywhere he can. Yeah. So it's a little suspicious, 9, and then 9 years later. He did live right down the street from her. So the chances of him never seeing her again, I don't know. So whenever he first hears her voice, this is what he relates to us in Vita Nuova. The miraculous lady appeared, dressed in purest white. between two ladies of noble bearing, both older than she was. And passing along a certain street, she turned her eyes to where I was standing faint-hearted. And with that indescribable graciousness for which today she is rewarded in the eternal life, she greeted me so miraculously that I seemed at that moment to behold the entire range of possible bliss. So he falls madly in love with Beatrice. Beatrice Portinari, that's the girl. And in Florence today, there's even a Via Portinari today. That was her dad, Folco Portinari, founded the oldest, it's still around today, the oldest hospital in Florence. And the Via Portinari leads up to that. So he sees her the first time, he says, when she's 9, he sees her again 9 years later. So Dante's first book, the Vita Nuova, is all about his love for Beatrice. Does anyone who has the portable Dante and read comedy with me last time actually read the Vita Nuova?
No.
Okay, well, if you do, it's all about Beatrice. She dies. She'll die very young, and Dante will be heartbroken. It's all about this infatuation he has with her. As time progresses on, he will get married, but not to Beatrice. We already said he marries Gemma Donati. He's actually engaged to her at 11. He's 11 years old. He's already betrothed to Gemma, and he will marry her when he's 20. So he's in love with Beatrice, marries Gemma. He will have 3 sons with her. He names them after the 3 apostles that were with Jesus on the Mount of the Transfiguration. He names them Giovanni, Pietro, and Jacopo. And he has 1 daughter, Antonia. Antonia will later move to where Dante is in exile, enter a Franciscan convent, and take the name Sister Beatrice. Sister Beatrice. Suora Beatrice. But so he's a family man. He's in charge of his family's responsibility. He's a politician, and he's a married, responsible man having children. His beloved Beatrice, she also marries. Dante will never mention this in his poems about her. He writes lots of poems to her and about her, never mentions that she gets married. She married Simone de' Bardi from one of the wealthiest families in all of Florence. Dante's family could not possibly compete on the social scale with the Bardi family. So, they're both married to separate people. So what do we make of Dante's love for a woman other than his wife? Madly in love with a woman, not married to her. Right? Well, the great Catholic writer and thinker Etienne Gilson says, "It is assuredly the love of a man for a woman. It is even profoundly a carnal love. But it is a love of which the object is not itself carnal, and is directed far less toward the beloved woman than towards the work which she inspired." The object of his love for Beatrice was to sing of her. Right? So Dante loves Beatrice, yeah, but he doesn't want to possess Beatrice in any kind of physical way. Honestly, he never really even talks to her that much. In the Vita Nuova, a couple times she'll be walking down the street, she'll say hi to him, and he falls into a faint. He can't handle it. And then he goes home and writes a bunch of poetry. That's what he does. Beatrice is his muse. He loves her, and she inspires him to write poetry. And that's all he really wants out of her. It's the courtly love. Right? It's like the knight who sees the woman in the tower and says, "I'm going to dedicate all my battles to this woman." He never is going to see her again. Doesn't really want to. But he's got this romantic ideal of who he's fighting for. Dante's doing the same thing with poetry. This is his muse. So there's not any kind of sense that he wants to hook up with Beatrice. Okay? Dante tells us in Vita Nuova, "I must tell you that whenever and wherever she appeared, I, in anticipation of her miraculous greeting, could not have considered any man my enemy. On the contrary, a flame of charity was lit within me and made me forgive whoever had offended me." For Dante, Beatrice, this beautiful woman that he meets and loves, who inspires his poetry, reflects the face of God into the world. So he sees her and he wants to forgive people. He's filled with grace just by seeing her, just by hearing her miraculous greeting. Dante will be bereft of his Beatrice in 1290. She dies at 25 years old. So here's this Florentine girl married to Simone de' Bardi. Her dad founds a hospital, and she dies at 25. The perfect person to be completely and utterly forgotten by history. But instead, we're talking about her here today, 700 years later. And it's because of Dante. Dante is, as we can expect, if you read Vita Nuova, he's a very emotionally frail person in there. He's swooning over the tiniest of things. He's emotionally devastated by this death. Weeping in pain and many anguished sighs torment my heart each time I am alone. And if someone should hear me, he would suffer. Just what my life has been since the hour when my lady passed into the timeless realm. There is not any tongue that could tell of it. Very dramatic. Dante will turn to the study of philosophy to get over his grief at Beatrice's death. And he'll meet Beatrice again, and we'll find out what she thinks of that. But he falls in love with Lady Philosophy. Now, when you read the Vita Nuova, it sounds like he's falling in love with a different woman. But when you read another book, Dante says, oh, no, that wasn't a different woman. No, that was philosophy. Is that convincing? I don't know. When you read the poem, it really doesn't seem like he's talking about philosophy, but we'll trust Dante. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He goes to Santa Maria Novella and studies with the Dominicans. He goes to Santa Croce and studies with the Franciscans. Like I said, he might go to the University of Paris, perhaps even Oxford. He goes around, he studies as much as he can. There's even a story of him in Siena. He gets a new book. For the first time, he's never seen this book before. He sits down right there in the street. He starts reading it. A huge party breaks out around him. There's a big festival, whatever people swallowing flames, whatever kind of festivals they had back in the Middle Ages. And Dante sits, he's reading. Finally, the party ends. One of his buddies come up to him and say, wow, what did you think of that, Dante? And he says, what did I think of what? He's completely unaware of what had happened. He was absorbed in his book in great power of concentration. He's a great poet, right? He wrote poetry, right? We've been talking about that. Poetry, we talked a little bit about the courtly love tradition. That starts in Provence in southern France. So we have this Provençal love poetry tradition, the troubadours going around singing of these love songs. And as we said, they would have these women that they would dedicate all these poems to, these songs to. The knights fighting would do it. But a problem arose. This is a very deeply religious culture. What's more important, your service to your lady or your service to God? Right? Sounds like it's in conflict. And they can't handle this. So it's very much stress created in the mind's cognitive dissonance. In these poets, I'm serving my lady, am I serving God instead? The poetic movement will move down into Sicily, the Sicilian school with the Emperor Frederick and his glorious court. The greatest poet down there is Giacomo da Lentini. We're going to meet a lot of poets later on in the poem. And we'll talk about who they were then. But we have this poet, Giacomo da Lentini. He writes, I have proposed in my heart to serve God, that I might go to paradise. Without my lady, though, I do not wish to go. Tension. Yeah, I want to go to heaven, but if my lady's not there, no thanks. I'll pass. It goes up into Tuscany next, right? That's where Dante lives. So it moves from Sicily. After the emperor dies, this poetic movement moves into Tuscany. Now we have Guitone d'Arezzo, great Tuscan poet. He actually will quit his job and move into a monastery. So you kind of get an idea of maybe where he's going with this divide, lady or God. He says, I completely flee love and do not want it. And more than anything else, I find it very hateful. So he completely receives one person, I don't even want to go to heaven without my lady. The other person, I don't want anything to do with love. I find it hateful. Dante's best friend, we talked about him dying of malaria, Guido Cavalcanti, great poet. He says that love despoils your reason and leads man into sin. He says, from its power, death often follows. So he says, watch out. In the beginning part of Vita Nuova, that's what we see Dante's poems are going to follow in that Cavalcanti's tracks. That's his best buddy. He's older than he is. Dante looks up to him. And you'll see Dante talking about how miserable his love for Beatrice makes him. He's crying all the time. His eyes are all swollen up. He's a very pathetic figure. And he serves the god of love. One of his early poems, Il Fiore, the flower, where he's using these kind of allegories that he won't use in the Divine Comedy, where he meets rage and lust and all that. He talks about how he serves the God of love, and he doesn't even listen to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So for early Dante, God of love, that's it. So you have this real tension. But the breakthrough that Dante will have in the Vita Nuova, inspired by Beatrice's death, and by the fact that Beatrice is for him a conduit of God's grace in the world. He'll solve this dilemma. he says that his lady is not something that's going to be in opposition to God. That's precisely what leads him to God. God creates everything. God creates Beatrice. Dante loves Beatrice, so he can love God greater. He's drawn to God, not away from God. And this is completed in the Divine Comedy. It's a revolutionary idea at the time. It's very Catholic, too. Right? We don't think it's, we just pray to God and ignore everybody else. No, we have the communion of saints. Beatrice, for Dante, is his own personal saint. He thinks if he's going to be saved, his only chance is through the prayers of Beatrice. He's just sure she's in heaven. You can't imagine anything else. He says, she's a miracle. Blessed be the Lord who can work so wondrously. So his love for Beatrice makes him bless God. It's no longer, I'll go to heaven, but I don't want to if my lady's not there. It's my lady is in heaven, and she's going to help me get to heaven. So he answers, he resolves this. Not only is it very Catholic, it's very biblical. In Luke 10:27, Jesus tells us the greatest commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. And your neighbor as yourself. Right there, Jesus is telling us. It's not, do you love your lady or love God? God doesn't compete with us for love against all the people that we love. No. We love the people because we love God. So Dante is able to change the course of poetic history. He's able to do with poetry what groups like the Knights Templar are able to do with fighting. Right? To take this knightly journey and dedicate it to God. We're going to fight a crusade. Dante's able to write his poetry and glorify God and bring people from a state of misery to a state of happiness. Convert people. People like me. All these centuries later. He'd be happy about that. And maybe people who took the class before lead you into a deeper relationship with Christ, a deeper relationship with God. That's why he's doing this. That's what he wants to do, like Beatrice did for him. So he's a great poet. He's also a politician. We talked about that. In June of 1300, he becomes he attains the highest political office in the land. Incidentally, it's right before he gets there that he starts his journey. He's going to set this journey right before he's going to get to the high point of his political career. And it's interesting because he finds himself lost. Next thing you know, he's in hell. He's having this horrible journey right before he reaches that high point. And we talked about it. He's going to be exiled. He's going to be kicked out of Florence, condemned to be burned. But he will never lose hope of coming back to Florence. He says in the comedy, he'll say that he has more hope than any other man alive. He's actually hoping that by writing this, they're going to bring him back home. In another work he wrote, De Vulgari Eloquentia, he says, of all who in this world are deserving of compassion, the most to be pitied are those who languishing in exile never see their country again, save in their dreams. That's it. He dreams of going back to Florence. But he will spend the last 19 years of his life in wandering exile, in crushing poverty. In fact, one of his early patrons passes away and he writes a letter. He has all these letters. We have 13 letters that still exist that Dante wrote. And he says, hey, you have to excuse me for not coming to the funeral. But my exile has left me so crushingly poor that I can't possibly make the trip. So he is not in a good place. Dorothy Sayers says he had lost love and youth, and earthly goods and household peace, and citizenship, and active political usefulness, and the dream of a decent world and a reign of justice. Dante was stripped bare. Right? So this exile is devastating to him. He wanders all around. He goes to Lucca. He goes all over Italy. He goes to Pistoia. He maybe goes to France. He's poor. He's wandering around. First he gets together with the other exiles and they say, hey, maybe we can fight our way back into Florence. And Dante says, no, I'm not going to mess with these guys. I'll be a party of one. And off he goes. And he just wanders around Italy. His family's in Florence. Remember, his wife's a Donati. They're the people running Florence. She can stay. She stays with her kids. Dante won't see them again for a very, very long time. He wanders about from this place to that place. Hey, here's a princess that needs someone to write letters for her. Oh, no, I'll go there and I'll serve in her court and I'll do this and I'll do that. And this person needs someone to go on a diplomatic mission. Well, my poem's already successful, so they'll send me. And he travels around. Finally, he goes to Verona in the court of Can Grande della Scala. Big dog. Can Grande. That's his name. And that guy finally gives Dante somewhat of a home. He says, you can stay in my castle with me. And Dante finally gets a little bit of peace. He'll dedicate the last part of the comedy to Can Grande. And actually, whenever he writes a part and he's going to circulate it, he always sends it to him first. He always sends it to the Con Grande first. His longest letter that exists is a letter to Con Grande, and actually describes the Divine Comedy. So he lives in Verona for a while. Then later, he finds an even better offer. He moves to Ravenna, where he's given by Guido of Ravenna, the leader there, Guido Polenta. He is given his own home for the first time since his exile. He's given his own home. And he gets his wife and his kids, and they finally move with him. So he finally has his family together again. And it's in Ravenna that his daughter will become Sister Beatrice. So he finally gets there. He moves there in 1318. Dies in 1321. So not much of a respite for Dante. How does he die? Well, Guido says, hey, Dante, you're really good with words. There's this confrontation brewing with Venice, and I want to avoid the difficulties. Would you mind going to Venice for me? So Dante says, okay, I'll go to Venice. Well, the Venetians are so worried that Dante's going to be so eloquent that they're going to convince them to do something wrong. They say, no, we're not going to meet with you. We're not even going to give you a ride back. You walk back. And he goes walking through the malarial swamps, contracts malaria, fatal disease in those days, and he dies. 1321, he dies. He's buried in the church of San Francesco, crowned with a laurel wreath at long last. He always wanted to be crowned a poet laureate. Someone actually offers him the opportunity. He says, stop writing this comedy. Cut this out. Write something in Latin. Dante writes this in Italian, of course. He says he wants to write it so that everyone can understand it. Even women folk can read in Italian. He wants everyone to read this. And so he rejects that offer. He did have one chance to go back to his beloved Florence. That Florence was under siege by a very powerful warlord. It looked like they were going to lose. They said, okay, we need everybody. All Florentines, come back. And we will forgive you your exile, including you, Dante. Except for the Uberti. These people stay exiled forever. They don't ever want them back. But otherwise, they say, come on back, everybody. Dante's friend writes him a letter. You can come back. You can finally come home. All you got to do is pay a fine, say you were guilty of taking bribes, wear sackcloth, go into the main church there and admit that you're a horrible sinner. You can be back home. And Dante says, no, I'm not going to do that. He says, the only way I'm coming back is if they're going to crown me a poet laureate in the main church in Florence. If I can come back with honor, I'm not coming back at all. He says, can't I contemplate the stars anywhere? Can't I contemplate God's truth anywhere? So, and he will die away from home. When he dies, the last 13 cantos of the comedy, they're not there yet. They're not written. Or so people think. At least they can't find them. His sons, Jacopo and Pietro, they said, okay, we're kind of like poets too. We take after old dad. We're going to finish the poem for him. We've got to finish this thing. So they start working on it. And then Jacopo has a dream. Here's his dad. And his dad says, no. You aren't trying to do this. Go back to my house, look behind this old straw mat that I have. There's a hole back there, and the last 13 cantos are in there. He wakes up. He gets his brother in the middle of the night. They run to the house. They find the cantos, and they send him off to Can Grande to be published. Dante's buried there in Ravenna. Florence, once he's dead, Florence says, hey, you know what? We really like to have Dante's body. We got to put a big museum. We're going to put a big mausoleum up for him. We're going to have, he's the best Dante. He's the best poet. He's a good Florentine. He needs to be here in Florence. And Ravenna says no. You didn't want him when he was alive. You're not getting him now. And they build a tomb for him, and they bury him. So Florence, they always want Dante back. And they can never get him back. Finally, 1519, first Florentine Pope, Pope Leo X. And Pope Leo says, for Florence, I'm going to get Dante back. And so he sends an embassy to go get the body. He commissions Michelangelo. He says, you're going to build the tomb. This is going to be the greatest tomb for the greatest poet in my hometown of Florence. The Florentines arrive in Ravenna. They say, okay, open up the tomb. We're taking him. They open the tomb up. And all they find is a couple small bones and some old, withered laurel leaves. The envoys say, where is he? And there are people in Ravenna say, well, he traveled through the afterlife in life, he probably went body and soul like Virgin Mary up into heaven whenever he was dead. They say, okay, I guess so. And off they go, and the Pope doesn't get it. Everyone forgets about this. Italy's is finally united into a country in 1865, right? In the 1860s. 1865 comes. 600 years since Dante's birth. The new Italian government decides, I know what we're going to do. We're going to have a big celebration of Dante in Ravenna, and we're going to open up the tomb and everyone can see Dante. So, there's going to be problems, right? Because they forgot there is no Dante in that tomb. Well, the next sharing a wall is the Bracciaforte Chapel. So here's Dante's tomb, and here's this chapel back here. And they decide, coincidentally, this needs renovating. So the workers start working, they're chipping away. Part of the wall crumbles. And they see a wooden chest, and it says, Dante's bones. And they finally find Dante, and they put him back into his tomb. There actually was an old sacristan who used to live in the Bracciaforte Chapel and take care of it. And he said, I used to always have these dreams of this guy walking around in this red robe, and he would say, I am Dante, son of Dante. So, there you have it. They found Dante. If you go to Ravenna, not Florence, if you go to Ravenna, you will see Dante's tomb. If you go to Florence, you'll see an empty tomb that says it's Dante's tomb, but there's no Dante inside. All right, so that gives you a brief overview. What time is it here? Okay, that gives you a brief overview of what we're going to be dealing with. This fascinating person, of all this history, of all these characters, and it's just going to keep getting better as we go. Some people have emailed me asking about what translation to use. Again, I recommend the Mark Musa. There's lots of other good ones, though. If you have a different translation, that's fine. It's not going to hurt you any. I don't recommend the Longfellow translation. That's the one you can find pretty easily everywhere. But unless you like the old English, like King James Bible English, then you're just going to make it harder for you than it needs to be. We will get to you, if you send, where's the email list, Rob? There they are. I'll get your emails, and I will send you out when we're going to read what, and what we're going to be looking at.
What do you say?
It's another.
That's fine.
But for next week it's 1 through 9.
Next week is going to be 1 through 9 of Inferno. Actually isn't that much reading, right, class, from last time? Not that much reading, is it?
Oh yeah, it's real easy.
It's real easy reading. And we are not going to agree, by the end of class, we're not going to agree with the great Spanish poet, Pedro Calderón de la Barca. Great Spanish poet. Dying words. Dante, why were you so difficult? We're not going to end that way, I hope. Instead, we're going to agree with the translator, Dorothy Sayers. Dante is the supreme poet of joy. That's what we want to end with. So we're not going to read just Inferno. That's what many people do. And that's a mistake that many, many people make. If you read just Inferno, you end with a vision of Satan. That's not what Dante wants. He wants you to end with the vision of God.
And depressed.
And you end depressed, right? You want to come out and you want to climb that mountain of purgatory.
Yeah.
They say people who tackle Dante by just reading Inferno in this superficial way seldom get beyond the picturesque squalors of the Inferno. This is as though we were to judge a great city after a few days spent underground among the cellars and sewers. It would not be surprising if we were to report only an impression of sordidness, suffocation, rats, fetor, and gloom. But the grim structure is only there for the sake of the city whose walls and spires stand up and take the morning. It is for the vision of God in the Paradiso that all the rest of the allegory exists. Dante undergirds his work in hell, but he spends 2/3 of his time among people who are saved. Those in purgatory and those in heaven. Everyone in purgatory goes to heaven. So he spends 2/3 of it. So anyone who thinks of Dante just from reading the Inferno, oh, isn't he that guy that just put people he didn't like down in hell and had them tortured? No, that's not at all what it is. So we are going to take the journey from the pits of sin to the face of God. And we will hope that we can agree with Dante, who says in Convivio, another one of his books, the progress of life, of man, goes from bad to good, good to better, better to best. And that's what we're going to do. From hell to purgatory, from purgatory to the earthly paradise, and then from the earthly paradise to the very face of God. So we will end on that note. If there's any questions,